Welcome to the DataCore partner event, the kickoff 2011. George Teixeira, CEO of DataCore Software, and John Toigo, publisher, famous blogger.
Something like that.
Yeah. George, how was it? You just had your presentation in front of hundreds of DataCore partners in Germany.
Well, for me, it's a wonderful experience being in front of hundreds of partners here in Germany, because I can remember a time many years ago when we started the company, and obviously having just a few was an exciting period. And now when you get into the multiples of hundreds, it's great because it shows the confirmation of our vision. And
today, after 13 years, it's a special week. Let's say it like that. It's SANsymphony-V. What's that?
Well, you know, one of the things for DataCore, SANsymphony-V really is a great opportunity for DataCore because it allowed us to take the experience of the last 13 years and really fold in the best practices and what we learned from the thousands of customers into the product. So SANsymphony-V is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of a new journey for us. It sort of reinvents what we were doing and gives a foundation really for the future. So beyond SANsymphony-V, it's the ability to basically extend its capabilities, and more importantly, what we've done is added a lot of capabilities within it that allow it to integrate even better with the virtual servers and virtual desktops, as well as capabilities like power scripting that are coming and things like that that allow it to be much more open and work in a much more open way with the entire virtual infrastructure.
John, I think you're visiting the DataCore partner days for the first time, at least in Europe. What's your first impression of the event?
Well, this is by no means my first time in Europe, but it is the first time that I've seen so much energy and enthusiasm generated around the idea of storage virtualization, which for a very long time in the storage hardware industry has been diminished in terms of its importance. I think what you're seeing here is a reflection of a growing recognition that you better virtualize your storage. It's the #1 cost center in your enterprise. It's between 33 and 75% of the spending that's being made on all IT hardware acquisitions today is going to storage infrastructure. We started attacking the problem of IT costs by looking at servers, and we backed into the problem of storage. And you better virtualize the storage in order to make the server virtualization and the desktop virtualization work. So it's no surprise to me that you'd have such an enthusiastic presence, such a number of distributors and IT solutions integrators present at a conference that deals with the world's premier storage virtualization product. The only software-based solution that I've seen that I think is what the industry uses as jargon enterprise class, serving the needs of everybody from the SMB up to the big enterprise. And everything in between, particularly in the mid-market where they need these kinds of solutions immediately.
Enthusiasm, energy, that's you as well. What's behind that DataCore and John Toigo? How did that come?
You know, I've known DataCore at least for 10 years, possibly as early as the earliest days. I like to fancy the fact that I knew them when they were a smile on mommy's face that daddy didn't understand. But the fact is that it was always clear to me that Zia Rawl, who I think is one of the undisputed geniuses of technology in our era, saw coming the requirements for virtualizing commodity hardware, for abstracting the services that were increasingly being added to array controllers out of the array controller to simplify the underlying hardware infrastructure and to move those into a more resilient abstraction layer as software. Because these days, let's face it, it's not the storage gear that breaks, it's the software on the array controller that goes down. And when it goes down, you lose access to your mission critical data assets. So I saw that early on as a requirement. I saw the industry primarily focusing on plumbing issues, how to join a whole bunch of disks together. Important stuff, but not really the big issue that people were going to be confronting. Their big issue was going to be, how do you manage isolated islands of technology, and the isolation is being caused by localizing services on the array controllers of the individual rigs. There had to be a better way to abstract that software layer so it could be shared and so it could be applied to a growing infrastructure. And I blew wise to the fact that DataCore was on the right track a long time ago, and I've been tracking them ever since. They may have fallen off the radar at Gartner or IDC or some of the other analysts who were out there for a time. Never fell off of my radar. I always thought that they were on the right track, and this was a crucial technology as we move forward. It just took a little bit longer than I think George anticipated, and that some of the analysts, of course, anticipated for it to catch fire. Now we're in the thick of it. Now all of a sudden they're the shiny new thing that's 13 years old.
Now is the time for virtualization. That's the title of a webcast you have done. And you're also hinting to desktops. Why is that so important?
Well, I believe that desktop virtualization blows the socks off of anything you've seen with server virtualization. You're talking about probably a 10x number of units that need to be virtualized in the desktop world. You got 400 million desktops out there. They average in price at about $400 each per desktop, and just in terms of hardware acquisition, and then probably an 8x multiplier on top of that for management over time. So you've got a huge investment in most organizations in desktop hardware that by definition has become a commoditized, well-defined platform. Whenever you got a commoditized, well-defined platform, moving it into a virtual environment becomes a very simple thing. But again, as we've seen with server virtualization, desktop virtualization is going to put new demands on I/O, new demands on the services that are required, like storage, to support those images. Now, most of the vendors in the industry, in the storage industry, have blown wise to this, and they're couching their numbers in terms of how much it costs per desktop, in terms of whatever it costs to amortize the price of their overpriced rig, their overpriced stand of disks. Okay, so you get a number like $35 per desktop, but it's linked to 5,000 desktops that must be virtualized in order to pay for the cost of acquiring this very overpriced stand of disk from brand name manufacturer XYZ. What DataCore recently did, and I back this 100%, was they did a freestanding test just using virtualized infrastructure with freestanding disk underneath it. So they basically isolate the cost of the underlying rig and just focus only on realistic numbers of desktops that need to be virtualized. No company is going to virtualize 5,000 desktops in one fell swoop. They're going to do maybe 200. Now, is that price point of $35 per desktop or less achievable at that small number? You won't get any information on that from the leading brand name storage vendors, because they're really not trying to figure out what's the cheapest way to virtualize desktop. They're figuring out a way to sell their rig. And so they jack the numbers down by jacking the number of desktops up. What we're seeing now are realistic numbers and some really non-intuitive things coming out of the research that Zia Rawl and DataCore are doing back at their shop on what it really takes to stand up a Windows 7 environment. Turns out it takes less than 190 megabytes of memory. And yet we've been going out and provisioning every desktop we got with 4 gig to be able to run Ultimate, Windows 7 operating systems, right? We don't need it. Those are borderline or edge conditions that we're provisioning for. When you're bringing in a virtualized environment, what he's demonstrating with the research he's doing is that we can do that much more cost effectively in a very small amount of resource. So that's groundbreaking research in a company that doesn't even specialize in desktop virtualization. They already know what the answer is from the storage standpoint. What they're trying to do is show you, look, this is reasonable, it can be done, and they're going back to some interesting configurations so that you can build your infrastructure, your virtual infrastructure, whether it's servers or desktops, in a predictable, manageable way, a predictable unit of technology. We're getting back to computer science here. This is a great thing, because so far what we've had is the triumph of marketecture over architecture in the storage industry.
George, what does that mean for?
I gotta follow this guy.
What does that mean for the partner? What's the message to the DataCore partner for 2011? What does he has to do
Well,
to be successful?
the key for the partners is a couple of things. One, most of our partners and who we are working with already have a virtualization practice. And they're working with VMware, they're working with Citrix, they're working with Microsoft. The key is for them to look at storage as part of that infrastructure software. Just like today, the VMware or the Microsoft Hyper-V have become hypervisors that largely make the server platform of choice irrelevant. I mean, today, no one really cares if it's an Intel, an IBM, a Dell, or an IBM server. That's what the benefit of the virtual server platforms have done. DataCore is bringing that same philosophy to the storage world, such that storage becomes largely irrelevant and, in fact, anonymous, and, in fact, insulated from having the impact to the users, the applications. That's the real benefit. So from the beauty of the approach of DataCore is that partners who are already selling into the virtualization practice can leverage their same sales presentations, the same benefits of return on investment, the same benefit of an infrastructure software that lives beyond the devices that come and go, that can be refreshed underneath, that can have things migrated in or out, and still live and perform and provide payback to those users on a long-term basis. That's really what this is all about. So from the partner standpoint, their job is pretty easy at this point. It's to convey an economic model that changes the dynamics of storage in the marketplace. And hopefully those partners also benefit by, A, getting customers who see that they are trusted advisors who are open to bringing in technologies that give them more capabilities. Because at the end of all of this, it's the end user that matters. And that end user will have greater choice, have more purchasing power because they're not hostage to some vendor's hardware platform. They can buy whatever they want and bring it into their environment. And meanwhile, the partners, instead of worrying about selling one particular device, are really looking at the customer from a holistic standpoint and trying to solve the bigger problem, which is how do I make a virtual infrastructure that's flexible, lives beyond all of these changes that are always happening, and provides better productivity while containing the costs. That's what it's all about, making it better, making storage better, making the environment more flexible, and allowing the user more power.
John, in your presentation, you mentioned the 4 most important pain points, the 4 C's, for the customer, which at the end of the day is the storage user. What's behind that 4 C's?
Well, the C4 objectives, so I was referring to those as the topics that come up every time I visit a manager of a business, whether it's in the front office or a manager of business IT in the back office. The 4 key problems that seem to recur in every conversation are cost containment, number 1, in the current economy. I think we all understand why we need to be attentive to that. And then compliance is a big issue with a very large number of my clients right now. The regulations and the laws on data governance and on data retention and preservation and protection are putting a real set of requirements on businesses today. And then continuity, which of course is a concern for everybody. It's one of the selling points for some of the server virtualization crowd out there, and certainly for server clustering, is the idea that you never go down, that your systems are always available, that your applications, the mission critical ones, are always available. And then finally, the issue of whether you want to call it this or not, carbon footprint reduction. In Europe, I tend to see that carbon footprint reduction means something. It has to do with climate change and reducing carbon footprint and what we can do to reduce the amount of atmospheric destroying gases. But in the U.S., where they perhaps are less conversant in the science of climate change, or less attentive to it, it certainly has a lot to do with cost containment, because energy has increased in price over the last 2 years 23.2%. And in a lot of sectors of the U.S., as a result of the grid and the way that it's configured currently, you can't get more power into your data center. So it's a very practical set of issues for them. So it may not be called carbon footprint, it might be part of cost savings, just as continuity may not be about some greater awareness of the need for disaster recovery and business continuity. It may be part of compliance, because a lot of the regs and rules in the compliance space require that you protect data assets. So anyway, these are the C4 objectives, and really, you know, that's one way to abstract the problem and one way to kind of set up those issues so you can have a coherent discussion with the front and the back office. The other way to think about it is business value, and this is what I heard George say in his previous response. If you read Harvard Business Review, business managers who are graduating from Harvard or read HBR always see a triangle. They use it like a penchant to represent everything. And the one for business value says cost savings, risk reduction, top line growth, or improved productivity. What you see with a DataCore product, or with storage virtualization generally, certainly as it's manifested in DataCore Software's SANsymphony-V product, is you got a great business value case that'll resonate with the front office. Does this thing save money? Of course it does. It breaks vendor lock-in. You can deploy Joe's JBods. You can keep gear in service longer. You can do an awful lot of things by virtualizing the platforms, which maintains the performance at what you need it to be and improves the performance of the less expensive gear on par with the performance that you're getting out of more expensive gear. And it gives you a platform for staging services like thin provisioning that you have to pay through the nose for when you buy them on a proprietary controller on a name brand storage rig. So I'm getting services that I'd usually have to pay a lot for. I'm reducing the cost of the overall infrastructure that way. What about risk reduction? They're protecting data on 3 layers. They've got continuous data protection to guard against viruses and carbon robot issues, you know, user accidentally deletes a file. They've got a local protection strategy in synchronous mirroring between 2 pieces of storage that are placed in close proximity or on a metropolitan area network, so that you can place your other data on the other side of town. And they've got this asynchronous replication, so you can make replication of data after it's been written to another stand of disk somewhere in Kalamazoo, you know, many clicks away. That's done basically to offer many layers of data protection that will certainly satisfy every compliance requirement I'm aware of, as well as ensure the continuity of your business, which is really what it's all about. So risk reduction, taken care of. Also, it insulates you from the standpoint of investment risk, insulates you from changes that the hardware guys might make in their hardware going forward. You've got a layer of adaptive caching over the top, so your performance is preserved whether some bright new shiny thing comes out or not. And then the third one is improved productivity. I'll tell you what, if you've got the uptime that's delivered to your storage by DataCore, what happens? You're not going down. You can actually, because things become redundant, you can take a stand of disk down, perform maintenance on them, and use its pair in a high availability configuration while you're performing maintenance on that rig. The only other place I'm aware of that you can do that is in a clustered environment, usually a virtual server environment, when you're dealing with the server hardware and the software that it's hosting. So again, this takes the whole requirement for planned downtime, which accounts for 40 to 60% of downtime in most organizations, takes it out of the picture. Because if you do high availability with storage virtualization, you can maintain all the storage rigs without causing any downtime for your business. That's improved productivity. So cost savings, risk reduction, improved productivity. You got the full business value case for DataCore.
George, sounds like a very positive future for DataCore. Can you give us an outlook? What are your expectations through the next years, market and company?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where DataCore goes, in terms of the company itself, I mean, this year we're looking to grow somewhere in the 30 to 40% range. That's some pretty big numbers, especially since you consider we've doubled our business over the last 3 years. The growth rates, I think, will continue to go forward. I think we've got all of the trends lined up behind us at this point. You know, virtualization, storage virtualization was something that was really being done by early adopters 3 years ago. Today it's right in the mainstream. beyond that, the economics, the economy, the recession sometimes is a good thing. It changes the way people think. And therefore, the whole construct of, you can do more with less plays right into us. I mean, we can leverage the existing infrastructure that's there. People don't have to overhaul their entire storage investments. That all plays to, selling more, being more successful in the marketplace. In terms of what happens to the company going forward, what I've learned is after running the company for 13 years, if you do the right things, build the right product, and make your customers happy, good things happen. And I'll leave it at that.
One last very important question, John. Why is the data on drunken data drunken?
Well, I think that, we've said in the presentation that I gave here, certainly some of the writing I've done around DataCore's release this software, that DataCore really helps you with the three fundamental tasks that are always assigned to storage administrators: capacity management, performance management, and data protection management. Those are the three things that you commonly associate with the poor geek who is the slowest guy to dive under the table when they're handing out the storage administrator job, okay? The fourth task of storage administration, I will guarantee you, is going to be data management. And right now, data is not managed well at all. So what we have, I've created a blog called Drunken Data. It has a lot of traffic through it because everybody seems to be very concerned about the fact that what they've got is, even in a DataCore virtualized environment, a well-groomed storage infrastructure that's being badly misused. And who's going to take responsibility for the data that's placed there? Is it going to be the storage administrator? He doesn't know what it is. He considers it a bunch of anonymous bits. Is it the end user? The end user doesn't understand the compliance and the regulatory requirements or any coherent way of classifying his data. If you've ever looked at, most people's desktops, they don't get around to cleaning them up after a while. They've got icons all over the desktop from projects that were completed this date or many versions of a project or whatever. They don't even clean up after themselves. There are ways to identify data. They're built right into the Windows operating system, for example, where you have to enter a little summary before you close the file and so forth. But they're optional, and it's the first thing a user turns off. So somewhere along the way, somebody forgot to take responsibility for classifying their data. And without data classification, we don't have an effective mechanism for purging the junk out of the junk drawer. And we're growing a humongous junk drawer right now. That's what Drunken Data, the blog, is supposed to be about, is finding ways to get the not only our storage infrastructure in order and architecturally sound, but also to figure out ways to sort what goes into the drawer. Okay, and what I'm thinking right now, after hearing the presentations about SANsymphony-V and some of the extents that they've left in place, some of the capabilities they've enabled with PowerShell applets and so forth, or codelets, I think that eventually we may actually see an application that could ride on top of DataCore. That right now DataCore makes it really easy for you to virtualize storage that's associated with an application. You just drag the disk over to the icon of the server and drop it, and boom, you've established a path between the server and the disk that's going to serve its needs. That's a virtual disk. What if you drag that disk over to a group of users, and everything that user produces based on the role that he performs at the company immediately goes to that storage? That's role-based data classification. Are you going to capture junk in that process? Sure you are. You're going to get the Britney Spears video the guy downloaded at lunchtime. But the fact is, you can set up policies to screen some of the data that's being written to the disk. Maybe that's another evolution of SANsymphony. Maybe I'll be back again when it's SANsymphony-X instead of SANsymphony-V, and we will have conquered the world of data management as that fourth undiscovered country in the storage management. Right now, it's not germane to most storage managers, but I think very shortly it will be.
So we are curious to hear more about that and read more about that. Thanks for now, George, John. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.